I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood. It was a quiet evening, the kind that made you feel grateful for the simple things in life. I had been married to Nancy for 15 years, and for the most part, it had been good. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we always managed to pull through. Or so I thought. As I sipped my coffee, Nancy joined me, sitting down with a sigh. She looked tired, her eyes carrying a weight I hadn't noticed before. Long day? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Work has been crazy. Nancy worked as a nurse, and her job often took a toll on her. But this felt different. There was something in her tone, a distance that hadn't been there before. Anything you want to talk about? I offered. She shook her head, forcing a smile. No, it's just work stuff. I nodded, not wanting to push her. We sat in silence, the only sound being the occasional chirp of crickets. It was peaceful, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite place. Over the next few weeks, that tension only grew. Nancy became more distant, often lost in thought. She spent more time on her phone, and I couldn't help but notice how she would quickly put it away whenever I walked into the room. One night, after another quiet dinner, I decided to confront her. Nancy, is everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You've been acting different lately. She looked up from her plate, surprise flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, you seem distant, like something's on your mind. If there's something wrong, we can talk about it. Nancy sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's nothing, Bill. Just work stress, like I said. Are you sure? I pressed, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might open up. But then she shook her head again. Yes, I'm sure. Don't worry about it. But I did worry. I started paying more attention, trying to pick up on any clues that might explain her behavior. And that's when I noticed her interactions with Ron. Ron had been my best friend since college. We did everything together. He was practically part of the family. But lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Nancy and Ron talked, the lingering looks, it gnawed at me. One evening, while Nancy was out, I decided to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, a breach of trust, but I had to know. As I scrolled through her messages, my heart sank. There were dozens of texts between her and Ron, messages that were too familiar, too intimate. I confronted her as soon as she walked through the door. Nancy, we need to talk, I said, holding up her phone. Her face paled. Bill, what are you doing with my phone? I saw the messages, Nancy, between you and Ron. What's going on? She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression hardened. Bill, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because it looks like you're having an affair with my best friend. Nancy took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. It's complicated. I never meant for it to happen. Never meant for what to happen, Nancy. Just tell me the truth, I pleaded. She finally broke down, sobbing. I don't know how it happened, Bill. It started as just talking. I felt so alone, and Ron was there. One thing led to another. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. So it's true then. You and Ron. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Bill. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood there, feeling numb. The woman I loved, the life we had built together, it all felt like a lie. I need some time to think, I said, my voice hollow. I walked out, leaving her standing in the living room, crying. As I drove aimlessly through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end for us, and I had no idea where to go from here. The next few days after finding out about Nancy and Ron were a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation over and over. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The betrayal cut deep, and I didn't know how to begin to process it. On a gloomy Wednesday evening, I decided I couldn't avoid facing Nancy any longer. I needed answers. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The house looked the same as it always did, but it felt different, like the warmth had been sucked out of it. Nancy was in the kitchen when I walked in, preparing dinner. The The smell of spaghetti sauce filled the air, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She turned to look at me, her eyes red and swollen. I know, she replied quietly. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence thick between us. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Why, Nancy? I asked, my voice breaking. Why, Ron? Why betray me like this? She looked down at her hands, fiddling with her wedding ring. It wasn't planned, Bill. It just happened. We started talking more, and I felt a connection. A connection, I repeated, feeling a surge of anger. He's my best friend, Nancy. How could you do this to me? To us? She winced, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, Bill. I know it was wrong. I didn't want to hurt you. I just felt so alone, and Ron was there for me. I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around her words. So what now? What do we do? Nancy looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. I don't know. I never wanted it to go this far. I still love you, Bill. I want to fix this, but I don't know how. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words. Do you love him? I asked, dreading the answer. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, it wasn't about love. It was about feeling seen, feeling wanted. But it was a mistake, Bill. A terrible mistake. I rubbed my face, trying to clear my thoughts. And Ron? What does he say about all this? Nancy bit her lip. He feels awful. He wants to talk to you, to apologize. I laughed bitterly. An apology? Like that will make any of this better. I know it won't, she whispered. But we need to figure out where we go from here. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. I need some time, Nancy. I can't just pretend like everything is okay. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Take all the time you need. I walked out of the house, my heart heavy. I drove aimlessly, ending up at the park where I used to take our kids when they were little. The swings creaked in the wind, and I sat on a bench, trying to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Ron. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers. But another part of me wasn't ready. Not yet. I put my phone away and leaned back on the bench, staring up at the darkening sky. The revelation had shattered my world, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the shock of Nancy's betrayal began to morph into a dull, constant ache. I moved out of our house and into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, and I often found myself wandering through the empty rooms, trying to fill the silence. Work became my refuge. I threw myself in my job, working late hours and taking on extra projects. My coworkers noticed the change, but they didn't press me for details, except for Emily. Emily was a colleague I had known for years. She was always friendly, always ready with a smile or a kind word. One evening, as I was packing up to leave the office, she approached me. Bill, can I talk to you for a minute? She asked, her voice gentle. Sure, Emily. What's up? I replied, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then said, I've noticed you've been different lately. You seem distracted. Is everything okay? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's a long story. But no, everything's not okay. Emily pulled up a chair and sat down, her eyes full of concern. Do you want to talk about it? I looked at her, weighing my options. Finally, I decided to open up. Nancy and I were having problems. Big problems. She had an affair with my best friend, Ron. Emily's eyes widened. Oh, Bill, I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly hard. It is, I admitted. I moved out. I'm trying to figure out what to do next, but it's all so overwhelming. She reached out and placed a hand on my arm. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Sometimes it helps just to get things off your chest. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate that, I said, feeling a small measure of relief. As the weeks went by, Emily and I started having lunch together more often. Our conversations ranged from work to hobbies to life in general. It was nice to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't entangled in the mess of my personal life. One afternoon, as we sat in a small cafe near the office, Emily looked at me thoughtfully. You know, Bill, you're stronger than you think. What you're going through, it's tough, but you're handling it with grace. I smiled weakly. It doesn't feel like it. Most days, I feel like I'm just barely holding it together. She shook her head. Trust me, you are. And you'll get through this, one step at a time. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could get through this. Back at my apartment, I started to make small changes. I put up pictures of my kids, started cooking meals instead of ordering takeout, and even picked up an old hobby, painting. It wasn't much, but it was something to focus on, something to remind me that life could still have beauty. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. Can we talk? I think we need to discuss our next steps. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Okay, let's meet tomorrow. The next day, we met at a neutral location, a park halfway between my apartment and our old house. Nancy looked worn out, her face lined with worry. Bill, she began, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you, and I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want to make things right as much as I can. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I've been seeing a therapist, she continued, and I think we should go to counseling. Even if we can't save our marriage, we need to learn how to co-parent our kids. Counseling, I repeated. I don't know, Nancy. I'm still so angry, so hurt. I understand, she said softly. But please, just think about it. For the kids' sake. I sighed. All right, I'll think about it. As we parted ways, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe counseling could help us navigate this mess. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward. The fallout for Nancy's betrayal was far from over. But with the support of friends like Emily and the possibility of counseling, I began to see a path forward. It was faint and fraught with challenges, but it was there. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope that I could find my way through the darkness. The idea of counseling with Nancy was both comforting and terrifying. I agreed to it, mostly for the sake of our kids, but also because part of me still wanted answers. The first few sessions were difficult. We talked about our feelings, our mistakes, and our hopes for the future. But the more we talked, the more I realized that there were still things I didn't know, things I needed to know. One evening, after another exhausting session, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing with questions. How long had the affair really been going on? Why did Ron, of all people, betray me like this? I decided it was time to find out. The next day, I called Ron. It took everything in me to dial his number. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. Bill, he said, sounding wary. What's up? We need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Face to face. There was a pause on the other end. All right. When and where? Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the diner near my place, I replied. I'll be there, he said, and then the line went dead. The next evening, I walked into the diner and found Ron already sitting at a booth. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped. I sat down across from him, the silence between us heavy. Thanks for coming, I said, breaking the silence. Ron nodded. I owe you that much. I took a deep breath. I need to know the truth, Ron. All of it. How long has this been going on? Ron rubbed his face, looking pained. About a year, he admitted. It started innocently enough. We were just talking, but then things escalated. A year, I repeated, feeling a fresh wave of anger and hurt. Why didn't you stop it? You knew what this would do to me, to our friendship. I know, Ron said, his voice cracking. I tried to stop it, Bill. I really did. But Nancy, she made me feel needed, like I was important. And I didn't. I shot back, my voice rising. I trusted you, Ron. You were my best friend. I know, he said again, tears welling up in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Bill. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that it wasn't about hurting you. I sat back, feeling drained. I need to understand why, Ron. Why her? Why betray me like this? He looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I guess I was lonely, and she was too. We found comfort in each other, but I know that doesn't excuse what we did. No, it doesn't, I said quietly, but at least now I know. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our conversation settling between us. Finally, I stood up. I need time, Ron, I said. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I need time to figure things out. I understand, he said, standing up as well. Take all the time you need, and for what it's worth, I am truly sorry. I nodded, then turned and walked out of the diner, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. At least now I had some answers, even if they didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Back at my apartment, I called Emily. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Bill, she said, her voice warm and comforting. How are you holding up? I talked to Ron. I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. He told me everything. Do you feel any better? She asked gently. Not really, I admitted, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know the truth. That's a big step, she said, and I'm proud of you for facing it. Thanks, Emily, I said, feeling a small measure of comfort. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're stronger than you think, Bill, she said, and you'll get through this, one day at a time. As I hung up, I realized she was right. Knowing the truth was just one step on a long road to healing, but it was a step in the right direction. And with friends like Emily by my side, I knew I could find my way through the darkness. The fallout from Nancy and Ron's betrayal had shattered my world, but uncovering the truth gave me a new sense of clarity. It was painful, but it was also necessary. And as I sat in my apartment, I felt a small flicker of hope that I could start to rebuild my life, one step at a time. The decision to sell the house came after much thought and many sleepless nights. The house, once filled with laughter and memories, now felt like a museum of betrayal. Every corner reminded me of what I had lost. It was time to let go and move forward. I met with a real estate agent named Karen. She was efficient and understanding, walking me through the process with a steady hand. This house has great potential, she said, as we stood in the living room. It should sell quickly. Good, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. I just want to move on. Karen gave me a sympathetic smile. I understand. We'll get it done. The weeks leading up to the auction were a whirlwind of activity. Karen arranged for the house to be staged, and I spent hours sorting through belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go. It was cathartic in a way, like shedding old skin. On the day of the auction, the house looked better than it had in years. Fresh flowers adorned the entryway, and the rooms were filled with soft, inviting furniture. It was hard to believe it was the same place where my life had fallen apart. I stood in the backyard, watching as people started to arrive. Nancy was there too, standing off to the side, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but we both knew this was something we had to face together. Emily showed up just before the auction started. She walked over to me, her presence a comforting anchor. How are you holding up? She asked, her eyes full of concern. I'll be fine, I said, managing a weak smile. Just want this to be over. She squeezed my hand. You're doing great, Bill. This is a big step. Thanks for being here, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. It means a lot. The auctioneer, a man with a loud voice and a friendly demeanor, took his place at the front of the crowd. He started with a brief introduction, then moved into the bidding. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a beautiful property here, ready for a new owner. Let's start the bidding at $300,000. The bids came in quickly, each one raising my anxiety. I watched as strangers decided the fate of my home, the place where so many of my memories were made. Do I hear $350,000? Yes, thank you. How about $375,000? Yes, over there. I glanced over at Nancy. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of the end of an era. Going once, going twice, sold for $390,000. The auctioneer declared. The crowd clapped politely, and just like that, it was over. The house was no longer ours. As the crowd dispersed, Nancy walked over to me. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before she spoke. Well, that's that, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. Yeah, I replied. It's really over. I'm sorry, Bill, she said, her eyes filling with tears. For everything. I know, I said softly. I'm sorry, too. We stood there for a few moments longer. Then she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Emily came up beside me. How are you feeling? She asked gently. Strangely relieved, I admitted. It's like a weight has been lifted. You did the right thing, she said. Now you can really start to move forward. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah, I think I'm ready for that. As we left the house for the last time, I felt a sense of closure. The auction had marked the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. It was time to move on, to build something new from the ashes of the old. With Emily by my side and a newfound sense of hope, I walked away from the house, ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like it was full of possibilities. Selling the house was a turning point, but the journey to reclaim my life had only just begun. Moving into my small apartment felt like a fresh start, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new experiences. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of possibility. I started to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a gym, deciding it was time to get back in shape. The physical exertion was therapeutic, a way to channel my anger and frustration into something positive. One afternoon, as I was lifting weights, Emily showed up at the gym. She waved as she approached, her ponytail bouncing with each step. Hey, stranger, she said with a grin. Fancy seeing you here. Hey, Emily, I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. What brings you here? I work out here too, she said, glancing around. Thought I'd join you, if you don't mind. Not at all, I said, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. We work out together, pushing each other to do better. Having Emily there made the workouts more enjoyable, and soon it became a regular thing. We chat between sets, sharing stories and laughing. It felt good to have a friend who cared. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, we sat in the gym's small cafe, sipping on protein shakes. You're doing great, Bill, Emily said, giving me an encouraging look. I can see the changes already. Thanks, I said, feeling a sense of pride. It feels good to take control of something in my life. She nodded. You've been through a lot, but you're handling it well. What's next on your list? Actually, I said, hesitating for a moment, I've been thinking about picking up painting again. I used to love it, but I haven't done it in years. Emily's eyes lit up. That sounds amazing. You should definitely do it. Maybe we can go to an art supply store this weekend. Yeah, I like that, I said, feeling a spark of excitement. That weekend, we visited a local art store. Walking through the aisles, filled with canvases and paints, I felt a rush of nostalgia. I picked out a few supplies, and Emily helped me choose some colors. Back at my apartment, I set up a small studio in the corner of the living room. The first time I picked up a brush, it felt strange, but soon the old familiarity returned. I lost myself in the strokes and colors, letting the canvas absorb my emotions. Emily would often join me, sitting nearby with a book or working on her laptop. Her presence was comforting, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone. One evening, as I was finishing a painting, she looked up and smiled. That's beautiful, Bill. You've really got a talent. Thanks, I said, feeling a warm glow. It feels good to create something again. As the weeks went by, I started to feel more like myself. I reconnected with old friends, went out more, and even started dating again. It was scary at first, but with Emily's encouragement, I took the plunge. One night, after a particularly good date, I called Emily to tell her about it. Hey, Emily, I said, my voice filled with excitement. The date went really well. Her name is Sarah, and she's great. That's fantastic, Bill, she said, genuinely happy for me. I'm so glad you're putting yourself out there. Thanks, I said it, feeling grateful for her support. I couldn't have done it without you. You're doing all the hard work, she said. I'm just here to cheer you on. As I hung up, I realized how much Emily had become a part of my life. She had been there through the worst of it, and now she was here as I started to reclaim my power and rebuild my life. Reclaiming my power wasn't just about getting in shape or picking up old hobbies. It was about finding myself again, about realizing that I was stronger than I had ever thought possible. With each step forward, I felt more confident, more alive. And with friends like Emily by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. The future was still uncertain, but it was bright. I was ready to embrace it one day at a time. The months that followed were filled with change. I was learning to live on my own again, discovering the joys and challenges of independence. It wasn't always easy, but with each passing day, I felt more confident and capable. One Saturday morning, I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off, redecorating my apartment. The place was functional, but it lacked personality. I wanted it to feel like a home, my home. I invited Emily over to help. She arrived with a box of donuts and a smile. Ready to get started? She asked, handing me a donut. Absolutely, I replied, taking a bite. I've been looking forward to this. We spent the day rearranging furniture, hanging up new artwork, and adding small touches to make the space more inviting. Emily had a great eye for design, and her suggestions were invaluable. As we worked, we chatted about everything from our favorite movies to our hopes for the future. It felt good to share these moments with her. You know, Emily said as she hung up a picture frame, "You've come a long way, Bill. This place looks amazing." Thanks, I said, feeling a sense of pride. It finally feels like mine. That's the best part, she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork, creating a space that reflects who you are. Later that evening, we sat on the couch, surrounded by the fruits of our labor. The apartment felt warm and welcoming, a true reflection of my new beginning. You know, I said, turning to Emily, I couldn't have done this without you. You've been such a great friend. She smiled, her eyes softening. I'm glad I could help. You deserve to be happy, Bill. Thanks, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. That means a lot. As the weeks went by, I continued to embrace my independence. I took up new hobbies, like cooking and hiking. I explored the city, discovering new favorite spots and meeting new people. One evening, I decided to host a small dinner party. It was a way to celebrate my new life and thank those who had supported me along the way. I invited Emily, a few old friends, and even some new acquaintances. The night of the party, my apartment was filled with laughter and the smell of good food. I looked around, feeling a sense of accomplishment and contentment. Great party, Bill, one of my friends said, clapping me on the back. You've really made this place your own. Thanks, I replied, smiling. It feels good to have everyone here. Emily arrived a bit later, looking radiant as always. She handed me a bottle of wine and gave me a hug. This is for you, she said, to celebrate your new beginning. Thanks, Emily, I said, touched by the gesture. I'm glad you're here. As the evening went on, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain of betrayal, the struggle to find my footing, and the joy of discovering who I was on my own. I realized that embracing independence wasn't just about living alone. It was about finding strength within myself. After the party, as I cleaned up the apartment, Emily stayed behind to help. We worked in comfortable silence, the bond between us stronger than ever. You know, I said as we put the last of the dishes away, I've learned a lot these past few months about myself, about what I want in life. She turned to me, curiosity in her eyes. And what's that? I want to keep growing, keep exploring, I said. I want to live a life that makes me happy, and I want to share it with people who care about me. Emily smiled, her eyes shining. That sounds perfect, Bill. You deserve all of that and more. Thanks, I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. And I'm glad you're a part of it. As she left that night, I stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Embracing independence had given me the strength to move forward, to build a life that was truly my own. And with each new day, I knew I was on the right path. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.